Ladies and gentlemen, people of the internet, welcome to Mind Gap. You're here with Simo and Roy. We're joined yet again by one of our favourite guests. I don't want to downplay it. You're so far our only guest. Please make him welcome. It's Eddie.
Yep. Pretty happy to be here, Mr. Roy and Mr. Simos.
It's our pleasure.
The favourite and only guest. So
yes.
It's
a
double
our
win.
Pleasure.
Double win.
Now, you actually dropped a bomb last time you were here. As we were leaving, you actually said that you own a Tesla. You have an electric car. What's that like?
Yeah, that's factually correct.
Just let that one slip, eh?
Yeah.
Just a slight little bomb that you dropped on us?
Yeah, so I, proud owner of a Tesla Model 3 Performance.
Yes,
and
Performance.
So I got that in September last year. It was one of the first off the boat here in Sydney. So, yeah,
nice.
But I've been in that waiting list for like a long time. Yeah, 3 years. So
wow.
So
I remember when you commented on Facebook, like I could put my deposit. I'm like,
yeah,
it just doesn't feel real. And then all of a sudden you drive somewhere.
Yeah. Then I pulled up to your place and
Pulled
I
up
was
and he
like,
goes,
yeah.
"Hey, okay, just get in the back. Get in the back." Yeah, I'm in the back.
Wowzers. Now, you did mention something that I thought was absolutely hilarious. You said, if you're out somewhere, are you worried that you're going to run out of juice? And you said to me, no, I don't get battery anxiety. Now, I think that is a hilarious term, but there must be some sort of a concern that if you're out somewhere in an electric car, you can't just go to a normal servo. So have you ever experienced an issue like that?
Yeah, so it's the term's range anxiety. Range anxiety basically happens when people sort of first get their EV, electric vehicle, and it doesn't have to be a Tesla, it can be any EV. And essentially, this anxiety is just the fear of running out of juice in the middle of nowhere. And obviously, you just, we don't have charging stations terribly commonplace, especially here in Australia at this stage. So, the fear of running out of juice it's a real fear for like the first week of ownership. And then after that, you're like, oh man, this is pretty easy. It's pretty easy.
You have to generalize it a bit more. It's not an electric vehicle issue. It's just an issue of driving a car.
Yeah.
Why do you think that petrol people don't get range anxiety?
Yeah. Well, I've seen people run out of petrol. I've run out of petrol.
Yeah, but why don't people get range anxiety with petrol vehicles?
Because they assume a petrol station is going to be nearby and they can just
petrol stations are everywhere.
Yeah. So it's an infrastructure issue more than anything,
What happens when you're in the middle of whoop whoop and you're in a petrol car and the closest petrol station is 50 kilometres away?
Yeah.
Are you going to have range anxiety?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course you will.
Yeah, you're going to have some serious range anxiety.
But whatever happened to wasn't the next big thing hydrogen cars? Because there's a hydrogen charging station at a local shopping centre, and I'm like, that's quite strange. Like I'm not used to seeing that, especially if we're in Europe. Yes, here not so much. Yep.
Yeah, so I think hydrogen was a big push in Japan, coming from Honda and Toyota especially. Mm-hmm. They were all gung-ho for hydrogen and started setting up hydrogen pumping stations and were in developing several models of hydrogen-only cars. Yeah. And it was a big thing. But I think, there's, as with all new technologies, there is issues with early adoption. And I think the biggest problem with hydrogen really was...
big and expensive.
It's a complex storage issue for the car to make it safe, and it's also a reasonably complex infrastructure issue to be able to move hydrogen around and have it available at pumping stations and all that sort of stuff. So essentially, you
waste a lot of energy transporting it, like with petrol.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the biggest issue with hydrogen really was going to be the adoption, seeing how kind of electric vehicles were already out there. I mean, the first car ever built was electric, actually. So electric vehicles are not new. They've been around for a while. It's just nobody's taken the time to actually perfect the technology and make it feasible for the average man, really. So, or woman or person.
Yeah.
So,
Very politically correct
mate,
of you,
we
Eddie.
are
Well, look,
in 2020 now, Simo. We've got to
Yeah,
cover
we've
all
gotta-
bases.
Watch what we say.
They had electric cars for a while initially, and then it was outperformed by the petrol cars, and then they just switched to petrol because there was just no market
Yeah.
for the electric cars.
Well, I think also that the thing was that the people who developed the petrol car also had vested interests in petroleum, right? So,
Oh yeah, it was a big boys' club.
yeah,
Basically.
exactly.
Because you sent
So-
me a link, I think, the other day of an endurance race.
Oh yeah,
Where the electric car, the latest and greatest Porsche, no one can compete with that. The Tesla
which was
actually
also
crapped on it.
it was also both of them were electric.
yeah.
Yeah, both electric cars, but the Porsche latest and greatest, like you would assume, let's buy that one.
Yes. Look, the Porsche was, I think it was fast. Like, we don't have enough info, I think, but the Porsche was faster, but it had to charge maybe more than once. Whereas the Model 3 only had to charge once, and that's not even considering that the Model S, long-range Model S, would have made the gap even wider.
Yeah, so the long-range Model S now is the first electric car in production to exceed 400 miles to a charge,
Right.
officially. So I think the going back to our earlier thing regarding petrol, and I think the impetus to develop electric vehicle technology way back when just wasn't there, essentially because, like you said, it was a bit of a boys' club. But I think
Yeah,
the impetus from an industrial perspective to make money was more on the petrol side, right?
You
So they
had cars, and you also had all of the things that make the internal combustion engine, all the suppliers, all the parts,
all the parts, the
all
oil.
the servicing, the oil, all of that became an industry, and they wanted to protect themselves, and rightly so. I mean, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
But that's kind of, sometimes capitalist systems can dig itself into a hole,
Yeah.
and it's hard to take out and unseat the incumbent. I mean, that's why we have this issue with monopolies. We had for example, in the software industry, Microsoft had a stranglehold on the software and operating system industry, and it was terrible because then it stifled innovation. We had Intel in the microchip industry. They had no competition. Firstly, the x86 license was only given out to a few people, and AMD, which was the only real competitor, was awful for a long time. And Intel dragged their feet so much. We had quad cores, 4 cores, for about 10 years.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Because they want to sell you every iteration
they
between,
want,
right?
They want to squeeze every ounce of profit out of it. Now, as far as the oil industry, that's kind of like a whole capitalist system itself when you couple it with the automotive industry and all this, because they had no real competitor to their system, and now the electrics come along. It's really, challenged the status quo, and I think at the end of the day, it took a car manufacturer that wasn't entrenched in that system and had nothing to lose from that system to unseat it.
Yeah, I think that the comparison between what Apple did with the iPhone and what legacy manufacturers like Motorola and Nokia,
You're right.
that analogy is
The
100%
same thing, yeah.
accurate in my honest opinion in what's happening with Tesla and the disruption that they're having. When you compare it to, not just the big car companies like Toyota and Ford, but also sort of the more luxury segment competitors, right? So you're looking at BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Audi. They're I think they're going to be in some real trouble trying to spend the money to do the sort of innovation that's necessary in order to compete with what Tesla's currently offering. And I've read quite a bit. Obviously,
You're quite invested in Tesla.
I've got the car. So I'm not an expert, but I've read quite a bit, and the latest sort of guesstimates around how far the competition is behind Tesla is around 5 to 7 years. So, you know, and that's not even factoring in the infrastructure. So Tesla have a supercharger network. It's actually a global network.
Yeah, they've got everything.
And basically,
Head start and
they've
everything.
placed these strategically so that you can actually sort of do long distance traveling from, you know, major hubs to major hubs. So, for instance, here in Australia, the eastern seaboard, up and down the east coast, is pretty much covered from Adelaide right through to Brisbane. So you can do that on the supercharger network with your Tesla, and even the standard range plus, which is the entry level Tesla. That can do it as well, right? And that has the shortest range out of any Tesla.
Which is what exactly? What is the range?
So the range on the standard range plus...
Apart from, I just want to clarify,
Yeah.
because, you know, a manufacturer will tell you that like, this is the range. And then real life testing, that's why I think it'd be great to ask, actual real world testing.
Yeah.
Is their range actually correct? Because usually there's a bit of leeway there.
Yeah, so there's multiple different ways in which different organizations measure the range of an electric vehicle, or any vehicle actually. So there's a North American version, there's a version that they use in Europe and the UK, which is actually, I think, similar to the version we've adopted here in Australia.
Right.
So real world range for me, I mean, the range on my car on the website, I think, is like 560 kilometers. The real
That's pretty
world
good.
range that I found that I get in my everyday driving with the performance model, so I do give it a squirt every now and then,
Of course you do.
is about 430 to 450 Ks, okay?
You just got to remember,
Yeah.
E equals MC squared.
Right.
So if you go twice as fast, you use 4 times as much energy.
Yeah.
That's a good analogy,
Yeah,
actually.
exactly.
That's probably quite accurate, would you say,
Exactly.
Eddie?
Yeah, exactly. So I think the other thing with electric cars, you know, there's probably a couple of more factors that you need to consider as opposed to your internal combustion engine when it comes to range. So with electric cars, temperature does affect range. Okay, so the colder the temperature, the harder the car has to work to keep the batteries in the nominal temperature range
I heard
in
about
order
that.
for them to have the most
Yeah.
efficient performance possible.
Yeah,
And obviously,
that's
the irony there is that in order to maintain its efficiency, it's being inefficient. I get it, but and I think, you know, the same goes for internal
Petrol,
combustion engines. Although those engines, because they're actually combusting, tend to
They have an
heat.
excess
They have
of
a
heat.
heat excess as a byproduct, so it's not as big
You know,
an
it's
issue.
interesting though that like an internal combustion engine, let's say it's rated at 500 horsepower, it's actually making about 1,500 horsepower. Just 1,000 horsepower is heat.
Yeah, heat dissipation is
And inefficiencies in the drivetrain and
when you add
and
it all
noise
up.
as well. Let's not forget noise.
Oh, noise is not much. It doesn't take much horsepower to blow the audio space up.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
So but yeah, it's mostly heat, and I think they're even 15 or 20% efficient at that. It's just you know, most of it is heat, unfortunately. But I mean, there's so many things that they could have done to make it more efficient. I mean, why couldn't you have, when you turn the engine off, put some shrouds around that just keep the engine warm? So, you know, if you're going to start the engine up in 10 hours, the engine could be, you know, at 70, 80% warm. And we have we have thermos flasks, we have lots of thermal insulation technology. I mean, I just thought surely you could keep an engine warm for a couple of days, and that way you avoid the whole, you know, thermal expansion issues with, you know, the long-term longevity of the engine, that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
no,
I'm not sure making an internal combustion engine as efficient as possible is in the best interests of big oil or big
the
petrol.
CAFE standards.
But that's
it's
a, you know, that's a
there was the CAFE standards.
yeah.
Corporate average fuel economy, and so that's why the cars became bigger and heavier whilst also consuming more petrol because they were bigger and heavier, even though they were more efficient. So you had cars, they got more efficient, but they ended up using the same amount of petrol
Yeah.
to travel the same distance.
Yeah.
Corporate average fuel economy.
I like that.
So the Civic, if you looked at a Honda Civic from the late 1970s and looked at the size of the Civic and fast forwarded 20 years to the late 90s, early 2000s Civic, and just see how much weight it's gained.
It's massive.
It's comparable to the efficiencies the engine has made.
Yeah.
And so you'll get a late 70s Civic. It will go the same distance with the same amount of petrol as the heavier Civic with a more efficient engine.
So it's a net zero gain in a way.
Net zero, yeah.